Now, it's worth studying not just the rhetoric of a particular group like this, but it's worth studying what actually happened in a state in which anti-evolution forces gained control of the State Board of Education. And the state that I'd like to suggest as a case study is the state of Kansas. Anti-evolution forces gained control of that State Board of Education in the late 1990s, and they literally struck evolution from the state science curriculum. They didn't ban it, but they took it off the test. And any teacher will tell you, if it ain't on the test, I'm not going to waste time talking about it. Well, as it turns out, pro-evolution forces were returned to the state board, but in 2004, the anti-evolution forces won again. And what you saw happening in Kansas, and this is an article from 2005, which is a sharp debate on evolution, educators consider intelligent design. Here's some kids in a Kansas classroom. Look what textbook they're using. It's our textbook, God bless them. And what that Board of Education did was to revise the state science standards. They did this in 2005. Intelligent design supporters on the Board of Education had their way with science education standards. And many people thought they would go after evolution. In a sense, they did. But their target was much larger than evolution. They literally rewrote the definition of science itself. And not just evolutionary or life sciences, but sciences as it applies to physical science, earth science, and so forth. For example, up until 2005, here was the definition of science in the Kansas education standards. Science is the human activity of seeking natural explanations for what we observe in the world around us. It's a very simple, easy to understand, straightforward explanation. Exactly what you'd like to have in science education standards. Well, what did the intelligent design folks do to that? They rewrote it this way. Science is a systematic method of continuing investigation that uses observations, hypothesis, measurement, all this good stuff, logical argument and theory building to build more adequate explanations of natural phenomena. Now that sounds innocent enough, but why was natural taken out and replaced by more adequate? And it turns out this is not an isolated example. There were 23 occurrences of the word natural, natural explanation, or naturalistic methodology. Every one of those 23 occurrences was deleted. Well, the majority of the board explained what they wanted to do, and that is they wanted to replace a naturalistic definition of science with what they referred to as a traditional definition. And one of them said in public they wanted to open science up to non-naturalistic explanations. As hard as I tried to think what a non-naturalistic explanation might be that would be scientific, I couldn't think of anything other than a supernatural explanation. And that is exactly what they were overtly trying to do when they replaced this in science. Well, as it turns out, this became an issue in the elections of 2006, and the voters of Kansas unseated enough intelligent design proponents to reseat a pro-science majority on the board, and these changes have now been reversed. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. There are elections in Kansas every 2 years. The pendulum may swing the other way. But this is the sort of conflict that has been going on. And again, what really turned the tide in Kansas was not outrage just from the biologists in Kansas, but when the physical scientists and the chemists and the physicists realized that this non-naturalistic definition of science applied to them too, they came out in force and said, we have to get the idea that science deals with natural explanations back into the standards, which is exactly where it is. Now, the next stop on this, or a previous big stop on this a year or two earlier, was a school district in Pennsylvania called Dover, Pennsylvania. And to make a very long story short, a pro-intelligent design board of education drafted a 4-paragraph intelligent design lesson they thought as a compromise, and asked the science teachers in Dover to read this lesson to their students. At the risk of being fired, the science department at Dover High, and this is 3/4 of the science department at Dover High, it's a very small school, refused to do it. And what happened was the school board had to instruct the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, to go into the classroom and read this intelligent design lesson to students. What happened the next day is that 11 parents in the district, led by a plaintiff named Tammy Kitzmiller, K-I-T-Z Miller, filed a lawsuit in federal district court saying that their First Amendment rights as Americans had been infringed upon because the school board, which was an agency of government, had endorsed a particular religion and was using the agencies of the state to advance that religion, which is a violation of the First Amendment. This is the news conference in which the lawsuit was announced, and one of the principal exhibits in the lawsuit was a textbook. You can see it right here, called Of Pandas and People, which the school board bought for the students to use to study the meaning and content of this thing called intelligent design. Now, what was going on here? What was going on here, and that's the textbook right there, is that the school board was following a playbook. And the playbook is called Intelligent Design in Public School Science Curricula, a legal guidebook. It's written by David DeWolf and Stephen Meyer, both of whom are affiliated with the Discovery Institute, and Mark DeForest. This playbook basically argues that it is constitutionally permissible and necessary to have intelligent design taught in your classroom, in your schools, and that's what the school board was following, and they recommended the use of the textbook Pandas and People in order to do this. The Discovery Institute is a pro-intelligent design think tank in Seattle, Washington, and a subgroup of that called the Institute for Science and Culture is actually headed by Stephen Meyer, who's one of the co-authors of this pamphlet. Now, what happened as this case moved towards trial in 2005 is that newspapers around the country described it as the new monkey trial, which in a sense it was. And the trial opened with great fanfare in the last week of September 2005, and I had the honor, although I'm not sure if that's the right word, of being the lead witness for the plaintiffs in that trial. So I ended up spending 2 full days on the stand talking about all of this, and one of the reasons I was there was because the textbook that the teachers had recommended for the biology classes in Dover was in fact my textbook. So the content of that textbook was really part of the dispute, and therefore having me there as an expert witness enabled me to explain how we put our textbook together and what we have in mind for the teaching of biology. Now, I've used the term intelligent design several times, and you also heard it in the previous talk. And it's always important to define terms, so I think we have to do this. Intelligent design in the context of the conflict in the United States today, and certainly the trial in Dover, has a very specific meaning. And it's important to be precise about this meaning. I would say that theists, people of faith, by definition, believe that there is a transcendent intelligence around us, and they might express that as a view that there is an intelligent design to the universe. For what it's worth, that's a view I hold myself. But it turns out that is not what is meant by intelligent design in the current situation. What is meant by intelligent design is a little bit of that, but is actually much more this. And it's the proposition that what is called design, and what design means in this case is outside, intelligent, creative intervention is required to account for the origins of living things. And what this means is intelligent design is not this sort of general philosophical consideration of meaning and purpose. Instead, it is a doctrine of special creation. And that is how it is recognized and appreciated by the scientific community as a relabeling of creationism. And it's very important to understand that in the context of this trial. Now, at first, as this case moved towards trial, and this is an anecdote that I love to tell because I just couldn't believe how things turned out, the advocates of intelligent design relished the chance to confront the people that they call Darwinists in the courtroom. And this is a television network sketch of me during my testimony in the courtroom, being grilled, being cross-examined by one of the attorneys for the other side. You can see the judge, Judge John Jones, the Middle District of Pennsylvania, is there watching. Now, when I say they relished, they couldn't wait to get us Darwinists in the courtroom. I want to show you what I mean by this. This is a blog by William Dembski, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement, called Uncommon Descent. In May of 2005, we're now about 4 months away from the trial, Dembski is fantasizing about how much fun it's going to be to squeeze the truth out of the Darwinists. And he's promulgating something he calls the vice strategy. We're going to put the Darwinists in a vice. And what he says is, I await the days in which hearings involve subpoenas that compel evolutionists to be deposed and interrogated at length in their views. At the exact time he wrote this, May 2005, 2 weeks after that day, I was, in fact, deposed under oath for 9.5 hours as part of the record leading up to trial. So I was put under oath, I was subpoenaed, and I was deposed. And he said, when we do this, we're going to interrogate the Darwinists and squeeze the truth out of them. Now, if you think he was kidding about this, and you can't make this stuff up, these are 2 pictures he put on his website. he put him up there. Little Charlie Darwin doll with its head in a vice, being squeezed tighter and tighter.